Sweat dripped down my back as I stepped off the plane in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The African heat hit me like a wall, but it wasn't the temperature that made my heart race. It was the knowledge that I was about to meet Ibrahim Traoré, the young military leader who had captured not just a nation, but my heart through countless late-night video calls and encrypted messages. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to tell you a story that could destroy everything I've worked for. A story about love, lies, and a secret so dangerous that it could topple governments and end lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I first heard his voice through my computer speakers in my cramped Chicago apartment. It was October 2022, just weeks after Captain Ibrahim Traoré had led a military coup in Burkina Faso. I was working as a freelance journalist, struggling to make ends meet, when my editor assigned me to write a piece about the youngest military leader in Africa. At 34, Traoré had become the face of a new generation of African leaders, promising to rid his country of corruption and foreign influence. I spent weeks researching him, watching his speeches, studying his background. There was something magnetic about him. The way he spoke with conviction, the fire in his eyes when he talked about African sovereignty, the genuine concern he showed for his people. I found myself staying up late, not just for work, but because I was genuinely fascinated by this man who dared to challenge the established order. The first time we spoke was through an intermediary, a contact I had developed who worked in the presidential palace. I had requested an interview, never expecting it to be granted. But somehow, through a series of encrypted channels and careful negotiations, I found myself on a video call with Ibrahim Traoré himself. He was more handsome than his photos suggested, with kind eyes that seemed to see right through the camera into my soul. We talked for 2 hours about politics, about Africa's future, about his vision for Burkina Faso. But somewhere in that conversation, something shifted. The professional distance dissolved, and I found myself talking to him not as a journalist, but as a woman captivated by a remarkable man. That first call led to another, and then another. What started as interviews became late-night conversations about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. I shared my own struggles, my loneliness in a city that often felt indifferent to my existence. Despite the thousands of miles between us, despite the vast differences in our worlds, we connected in a way I had never experienced before. Months passed. Our conversations became a daily ritual. He would call me after his official duties, usually late at night his time, early evening mine. We talked about books we were reading, movies we had seen, the dreams we harbored for the future. Slowly, carefully, we fell in love across continents. But I was living a lie so fundamental that it colored every conversation we had, every promise I made, every "I love you" I whispered into my phone. You see, I wasn't just Sarah Mitchell, struggling freelance journalist from Chicago. I was also Sarah Mitchell, CIA operative, and my assignment was to get close to Ibrahim Traoré. The agency had been watching him since the coup. They were concerned about his anti-Western rhetoric, his friendliness with Russia, his potential to destabilize American interests in the region. My handler, a cold woman named Director Patricia Hayes, had identified his apparent loneliness and suggested a honey trap operation. Get close to him, gain his trust, extract intelligence about his plans and his connections to foreign governments. It was supposed to be simple. Seduce him, manipulate him, betray him. I had done similar operations before, though never one that required such an extended timeline or such emotional investment. But as the months passed and our relationship deepened, I found myself in a situation I had never anticipated. I was falling genuinely in love with my target. The guilt ate at me daily. Every time he shared a vulnerable moment, every time he spoke about his hopes for his country, every time he told me he loved me, I felt like I was poisoning something beautiful. But I couldn't stop. Not just because of my duty to the agency, but because I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. The breaking point came in March 2023, when he asked me to visit him. "Sarah," he said during one of our calls, his voice soft with emotion, "I know this is crazy, but I can't imagine my life without you. Come to Burkina Faso. Let me show you my world. Let me show you the future we could build together." I should have said no. I should have found an excuse, maintained the distance, kept things virtual. But looking into his eyes through that screen, seeing the hope and vulnerability there, I couldn't refuse. "Yes," I heard myself saying. "Yes, il come." That night, I called Director Hayes. "I need to abort the mission," I told her, my voice shaking. "This has gone too far. I'm compromised." Her laugh was cold, calculating. "Compromised? Sarah, you're exactly where we need you to be. This is perfect. He trusts you. He loves you. Do you have any idea how valuable that makes you? You're going to Burkina Faso, and you're going to complete your mission. And if I refuse? Then you'll find yourself facing charges for espionage, treason, and violation of the Official Secrets Act. Your journalism career will be over, your reputation destroyed. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and Ibrahim Traoré will learn that the woman he loves never existed." She was right, of course. I was trapped by my own deception, caught between love and duty, between the woman I had become and the operative I had always been. So I booked my flight to Burkina Faso, carrying with me a heart full of love and a bag full of surveillance equipment. The plane ride was the longest of my life. 23 hours of travel, with layovers in Paris and Casablanca, gave me plenty of time to think about what I was about to do. I had memorized my cover story. I was taking a sabbatical from journalism to explore our relationship, to see if what we had built online could survive in the real world. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, but the real truth was so much darker. As the plane descended into Ouagadougou, I pressed my face to the window and saw the landscape of Burkina Faso spread out below me. Red earth, scattered buildings, the urban sprawl of a developing nation trying to find its place in the modern world. Somewhere down there was the man I loved, waiting for me, trusting me completely. The airport was chaos, a mix of languages, colors, and energy that overwhelmed my senses. But then I saw him, standing behind the security barrier, and everything else faded away. He was taller than I had expected, more commanding in person than even his most impressive video calls had suggested. When our eyes met, his face broke into a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Sarah," he said as I approached, his accent making my name sound like music. "You're really here." He couldn't embrace me publicly. Protocol demanded discretion, but the look in his eyes said everything. I was escorted to a private vehicle, and as we drove through the streets of Ouagadougou, he reached over and took my hand. "Welcome to Burkina Faso," he said. "Welcome to my world." The next few days were like a dream. He showed me his country with the pride of a man truly in love with his homeland. We visited hospitals he was building, schools he was funding, agricultural projects designed to make Burkina Faso self-sufficient. I saw the genuine affection his people had for him, the way children ran to him in the streets, the respect in the eyes of the elders who sought his counsel. But I also saw the weight he carried. The constant security concerns, the economic challenges, the delicate balancing act of leading a nation caught between competing global powers. He shared his fears with me in private moments. His worry that he might not be strong enough to deliver on his promises, his concern that powerful forces might try to remove him as they had so many African leaders before him. "Sometimes I feel so alone," he confided to me one evening as we sat on the balcony of his private residence, looking out over the lights of the city. "Everyone wants something from me. Everyone has an agenda. But with you, Sarah, I can just be Ibrahim. Not the president, not the captain, just a man in love." Those words cut through me like a knife. Here he was, opening his heart to me, finding solace in what he believed was genuine love, while I carried recording devices in my purse and reported our conversations to handlers in Langley. The agency's demands escalated during my visit. Director Hayes contacted me through encrypted channels, pressing for more intelligence. They wanted to know about his military advisors, his relationships with foreign governments, his strategic plans. They wanted access to his personal communications, his schedule, his vulnerabilities. I provided what I could while trying to minimize the damage. I gave them information that was already public, insights that couldn't be used to harm him directly. But I knew I was walking a tightrope. Refuse to cooperate, and my cover would be blown. Cooperate too fully, and I would be betraying the man I loved. The crisis came on my 10th day in Burkina Faso. Ibrahim had planned a special dinner, just the two of us, in a private dining room at the presidential palace. He had arranged for traditional music, local cuisine, and an intimate setting that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Halfway through the meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Sarah," he said, his voice serious, "these past days with you have been the happiest of my life. I know this is complicated. I know there are challenges we'll face, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this. About us." He paused, searching my eyes. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My heart stopped. Did he know? Had he discovered my true identity? I forced myself to remain calm, to maintain the facade I had built so carefully. "Of course," I managed to say. "You can ask me anything." "I want you to stay," he said. "Not just for another week or two, but permanently.
I want you to make Burkina Faso your home.
I want you to be part of building this country's future. I want you to be my partner, in every sense of the word." The room spun around me. This was the moment I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. He was offering me everything I had ever wanted: love, partnership, a chance to be part of something meaningful. But he was offering it to a woman who didn't exist, based on a relationship built on lies. "Ibrahim," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "I know it's a lot to ask," he continued, misinterpreting my hesitation. "I know you have a life in America, a career, friends, family. But Sarah, what we have is rare. What we could build together could change not just our lives, but the lives of millions of people." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as he opened it to reveal a beautiful ring, not an engagement ring, but something more meaningful. A traditional Burkinabe piece, handcrafted by local artisans, that represented a bond deeper than marriage. "This is a promise ring," he explained. "In our culture, it represents a commitment of souls, a recognition that two people are meant to walk the same path. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight, though I hope someday I can ask you that question. I'm asking you to choose me, to choose us, to choose this life we could build together."
He stared at the ring, my mind racing.
This wasn't part of the plan. The agency had expected me to maintain the relationship for intelligence purposes, not to receive marriage proposals. I thought about Director Hayes, about my orders, about the consequences of refusing. But as I looked into Ibrahim's eyes, filled with hope and love and vulnerability, I realized that none of that mattered. Not the agency, not my cover, not the mission. What mattered was this moment, this man, this choice between love and duty. "Yes," I heard myself saying. "Yes, I'll stay." The joy on his face was radiant. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and I felt its weight like a chain and a liberation at the same time. We kissed, and in that moment I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to tell him the truth. But as I opened my mouth to confess, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Security personnel rushed into the room, speaking rapidly in French and local dialects. Ibrahim's face immediately shifted from lover to leader as he processed the information being relayed to him.
"What is happening?"
I asked, my heart pounding with a different kind of fear now. "Intelligence reports suggest there's a plot against the government," he said grimly. Possibly foreign-backed. We need to move to a secure location immediately. As we were hustled out of the dining room, I caught a glimpse of one of the security reports being handed to Ibrahim. My blood froze as I saw familiar names, familiar operational codes. The agency wasn't just using me for intelligence gathering, they were actively planning to destabilize his government. The next few hours were a blur of secure locations, emergency meetings, and growing paranoia. I sat in a protected room while Ibrahim met with his security council, trying to piece together the fragments of information I had seen. The CIA was planning something big, something that would likely result in Ibrahim's removal from power or worse. I had a choice to make, and I had to make it quickly. I could maintain my cover, complete my mission, and watch the man I loved be destroyed by the agency I served. Or I could warn him, blow my cover, and face the consequences. When Ibrahim finally returned to our secure room, exhausted and worried, I made my decision. "Ibrahim," I said, taking his hands in mine, "I need to tell you something, and it's going to change everything between us." He looked at me with concern.
What is it, my love?
"I'm not who you think I am," I began, my voice shaking. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, but I'm not just a journalist. I work for the CIA. I was sent here to spy on you, to gather intelligence, to find ways to undermine your government." The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I watched as understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by hurt, then anger, then something worse, betrayal. "Everything?" he asked quietly. "Everything between us was a lie?" "No," I said desperately. "Not everything."
The feelings, the love, that is real.
More real than anything I've ever experienced. But the way we met, the reason I'm here, yes, that was a lie. He stood up abruptly, turning away from me. "How long have you been reporting on me? What have you told them?" "Everything," I admitted. "But Ibrahim, listen to me. They're planning something bigger. I saw the intelligence reports tonight. They're not just gathering information anymore. They're actively planning to remove you from power." He turned back to me, his face a mask of controlled rage. "And you're telling me this why? Guilt? Or is this part of your mission too?"
Because uno love you, Isaid, tears streaming down my face.
Because despite everything, despite the lies and the deception, what we have is real.
And because uno can't let them destroy you.
For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he walked back to where I was sitting. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every detail of their plan, every contact you've had, every piece of intelligence you've provided. If you truly love me, if any of this is real, then help me stop them." I told him everything. The honey trap operation, Director Hayes, the surveillance equipment I had brought with me, the encrypted communications, the intelligence I had provided. I gave him names, dates, operational details. I burned every bridge I had ever built with the agency, made myself a traitor to my own country, all for love. As I spoke, I could see him making calculations, planning countermoves, thinking like the military strategist he was. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You realize what you've just done?" he finally said. "You've committed treason against your own country. They'll hunt you for the rest of your life." "I know," I replied. "But I'd rather spend my life running from them than spend it without you." He studied my face, searching for any sign of deception. "How do I know this isn't another layer of the operation? How do I know you're not telling me this to gain even deeper access to my government?" It was a fair question, and one I had been dreading. "You don't," I admitted. "You have no reason to trust me." "But Ibrahim, everything I've told you can be verified. The intelligence I've given you about their plans, you can use it to expose them, to protect yourself. If this were still an operation, I wouldn't be giving you information that could destroy everything they've worked for." He walked to the window, looking out at the city he governed. "There's another problem," he said without turning around. "Even if I believe you, even if I trust you, my government won't. My Security Council won't. When they learn that I've been romantically involved with a CIA operative, they'll demand your immediate arrest and deportation, if not worse." "I understand," I said. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. You can use the information I've given you to protect yourself, and I'll find a way to start over somewhere else." "No," he said firmly, turning back to me. "If you leave now, they'll know you've blown your cover. They'll accelerate their timeline, try to remove me before I can use the intelligence you've provided. You need to maintain your cover, at least for now." "How can I do that? How can I continue to report to them, to pretend nothing has changed?" "Because," he said, walking back to me, "we're going to feed them false information. We're going to use their own operation against them. You're going to become a double agent, Sarah."
For real this time.
The next few weeks were the most intense of my life. I continued to meet with my handlers, continued to provide intelligence, but now everything I shared was carefully crafted misinformation designed to mislead the agency about Ibrahim's true plans and capabilities. I told them he was weaker than he appeared, more isolated, less popular with his people. I suggested that a coup attempt would be easy to execute and likely to succeed. Meanwhile, Ibrahim used the genuine intelligence I had provided to identify and neutralize CIA assets within his government. He quietly removed officials who had been compromised, replaced them with people he trusted, and began building defenses against the planned operation. It was dangerous work. Every communication with my handlers was a risk. Every lie I told had to be perfect. Every piece of misinformation had to be believable enough to be acted upon but false enough to ensure their plans would fail. But the hardest part wasn't the spy games. It was rebuilding trust with Ibrahim. Despite everything, despite my confession and my cooperation, there was a wall between us now. The easy intimacy we had shared was gone, replaced by a careful partnership built on necessity rather than pure love. He was professional with me, kind even, but the spontaneous affection, the gentle touches, the whispered endearments, all of that had disappeared. I understood why, but it broke my heart. I had gained his alliance but lost his trust, and I wasn't sure I would ever get it back. The climax came sooner than expected. Director Hayes contacted me through emergency channels, demanding an immediate face-to-face meeting. She was coming to Burkina Faso personally, she said, to oversee the final phase of the operation. "She's here to confirm the intelligence I've been providing," I told Ibrahim after receiving the message. "If she suspects I've been compromised, if she realizes I've been feeding them false information, then we need to be ready," he replied grimly. "This is our chance to end this permanently, to expose their operation and prove to the world what American intelligence agencies are really doing in Africa." We planned carefully. I would meet with Director Hayes as scheduled, but the meeting would be recorded, monitored, and when the time was right, interrupted by Ibrahim's security forces. It would be a public relations coup, evidence of American interference in African affairs that would strengthen Ibrahim's position both domestically and internationally. The meeting was set for a café in downtown Ouagadougou, a public place that would seem safe to Director Hayes but would actually be surrounded by Ibrahim's people. I arrived first, my hands shaking as I ordered coffee and waited for the woman who had controlled my life for the past year. She arrived exactly on time, looking every inch the professional intelligence officer in her conservative suit and dark glasses. She sat down across from me, studying my face with cold calculation. "You look different," she said without preamble. "Healthier. Happier. I hope that doesn't mean you've lost your professional focus." "Not at all," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "The mission is proceeding exactly as planned." "Good," she said, leaning forward. "Because we're moving to the final phase. The assets are in place, The timeline is confirmed. President Traoré will be removed from power within the next 72 hours.
My blood ran cold.
Despite all our planning, despite the intelligence I had provided, they were still moving forward with their coup attempt. "What's the plan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She smiled coldly. "Your boyfriend has made a lot of enemies. Military officers who think he's too young, too radical, too dangerous to regional stability. Some of them have been very receptive to suggestions about alternative leadership." "You're planning a military coup?" "We're facilitating regime change," she corrected. "Democratically minded military leaders will take control, establish a transitional government, and guide the country toward free and fair elections. Elections that will result in a government more aligned with American interests."
And Ibrahim?
"Will be detained for his own safety during the transition. What happens after that will depend on how cooperative he is." I felt sick. They weren't just planning to remove him from power, they were planning to destroy him completely, and they were using me to do it. "There's just one more thing we need from you," Director Hayes continued. "We need you to ensure that President Traoré is in a specific location at a specific time tomorrow night. There's a dinner being planned with several military leaders, the ones who will be taking control. He needs to be there." "A dinner that's actually a trap," I said, the pieces falling into place. "A dinner that will result in a peaceful transition of power," she corrected again. "Sarah, I know this is difficult. I know you've developed feelings for him. But you need to remember who you work for, what your duty is."
This is bigger than your personal feelings.
I looked at her, this woman who had manipulated me, lied to me, used my emotions as a weapon against an innocent man. "What if I refuse?" "Then you'll be arrested for treason the moment you set foot on American soil," she said simply. "And President Traoré will still be removed from power, just without your help. The only difference is that you'll spend the rest of your life in prison instead of being rewarded for your service." She stood up, leaving money on the table for her coffee. "You have 24 hours to arrange the dinner meeting. After that, your usefulness to us ends, one way or another." As she walked away, I sat there trying to process what had just happened. The recording devices Ibrahim's people had planted had captured everything, but that didn't matter now. The coup was happening tomorrow night, with or without my cooperation. I looked around the cafe, trying to spot Ibrahim's security personnel, trying to figure out how to signal that the plan had changed. But before I could move, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Don't look around. Don't try to signal anyone. Just walk to your car and drive to the presidential palace. If you try to warn anyone or deviate from these instructions, President Traoré dies immediately." My heart stopped. Someone had been watching us, had anticipated our plan, had turned the tables on us. I stood up slowly, trying to appear calm while my mind raced. Who was behind this? The CIA? Rival military factions? Foreign agents? I walked to my car as instructed, my hands shaking as I started the engine. As I drove toward the presidential palace, I tried to think of a way to warn Ibrahim without triggering whatever threat had been made against him. But I was being watched, I was sure of it, and any deviation from the instructions could result in his death. The palace seemed normal when I arrived, guards at their posts, staff going about their duties. But something felt wrong, felt off. The security personnel I recognized weren't at their usual positions, and there were faces I didn't know in critical locations. I found Ibrahim in his office, working late as usual. When he saw me, his face immediately showed concern. "Sarah, what happened? The meeting with your handler went longer than expected, and our people lost contact with you." "Ibrahim," I said carefully, aware that we might be being monitored, "I need to speak with you privately." "It's urgent." He led me to a secure room, one designed to prevent electronic surveillance. The moment the door closed, I grabbed his hands. "They've been watching us," I said quickly. "Someone knew about our plan, knew about the recording devices, knew about your security people. They threatened to kill you if I didn't come here directly." His face hardened. "Who?"
"I don't know."
"But Ibrahim, the coup is happening tomorrow night. They want me to lure you to a dinner meeting with military leaders, but it's a trap. They're going to arrest you there." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. If someone was watching the cafe, if they knew about our operation, then they have access to intelligence that should have been secure. That means the leak is coming from inside our own government. The realization hit both of us at the same time. Someone in Ibrahim's inner circle, someone with access to our most sensitive plans, was working with the CIA. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "Now. If they're moving tomorrow night, they might accelerate the timeline if they think we're onto them." But as we moved toward the door, it opened before we could reach it. Several men in military uniforms entered, weapons drawn but not pointed at us directly. "President Traoré," one of them said in accented English, "you need to come with us." "On whose authority?" Ibrahim demanded, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "General Ouedraogo has assumed control of the military pending an investigation into allegations of treason and corruption," the soldier replied. "You are being detained for questioning." My heart sank. General Ouedraogo was one of Ibrahim's most trusted advisers, a man who had been with him since the beginning of his rise to power. If he had turned, then the conspiracy was deeper and more complete than we had realized. "And what about her?" the soldier asked, gesturing toward me. "The American woman is to be released unharmed," another voice said from behind the soldiers. Director Hayes stepped into the room, no longer bothering to maintain her cover. "She has served her purpose." "You're making a mistake," Ibrahim said, his voice steady despite the weapons pointed at him. "The people will not accept this. They will resist." "The people will accept stability," Hayes replied. "They will accept a government that works with the international community instead of against it. General Ouedraogo has their best interests at heart." As they began to escort Ibrahim from the room, he caught my eye. In that moment, I saw not the military leader or the president, but the man I had fallen in love with. The man whose trust one had betrayed, whose life I had endangered, whose country I had helped destroy. "Sarah," he said quietly, "remember what I told you about building the future. It's not over." Then he was gone, led away by soldiers who had once served him loyally. Director Hayes turned to me with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations," she said. "Mission accomplished.
You'll be on a flight back to Washington in the morning for debriefing."
"What happens to him?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "That depends on how cooperative he is during questioning. If he's smart, he'll accept the transition quietly and fade into obscurity. If he's not—" She shrugged. "African politics can be very dangerous." I spent that night in a hotel room under CIA protection, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the man I loved, now imprisoned because of my actions. The ring he had given me sat on the nightstand, catching the light from the street outside. A promise of a future that would never come to pass. But Ibrahim had been right about one thing: it wasn't over. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, I could hear sounds of unrest in the streets. People were learning about Ibrahim's arrest, and they were not accepting it quietly. Protests were forming, demonstrations were being organized, and the international community was beginning to ask questions about the sudden change in government. Director Hayes appeared at my door early that morning, her calm demeanor replaced by obvious stress. "There's been a complication," she said without preamble. "The transition isn't going as smoothly as expected."
"We're moving up your departure time."
"What kind of complication?" "The kind that makes staying in this country extremely dangerous for American citizens," she replied grimly. "Pack your things." We're leaving in 30 minutes. As I threw my few belongings into a suitcase, I could hear the protests growing louder outside. Car horns honking, crowds chanting, the sound of a people refusing to accept the theft of their democracy. The drive to the airport was tense, our convoy surrounded by military vehicles for protection. But even with the heavy security presence, I could see the signs of Ibrahim's continued popularity. His face appeared on hastily made posters and banners, crowds gathered on street corners despite the military presence, and the energy in the air was electric with resistance. At the airport, as I waited for my flight to board, I watched the news coverage on my phone. International journalists were reporting on the situation, questioning the legitimacy of the coup, demanding access to Ibrahim. African Union officials were condemning the military takeover, and even some Western governments were expressing concern about the rapid change in leadership. Second thoughts? Director Hayes asked, sitting down beside me. I looked at her, this woman who had orchestrated the destruction of the man I loved and the country he had been trying to build. About what? About him. About this whole situation. I know it's hard, Sarah, but you did the right thing. He was becoming a threat to regional stability, to American interests. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. Whose greater good? I asked quietly. She studied my face. I hope you're not having second thoughts about your loyalty to your country. I'm having second thoughts about a lot of things, I replied honestly. The flight to Washington was long and turbulent, both literally and metaphorically. As we flew over the Atlantic, I thought about Ibrahim, probably sitting in a cell somewhere, wondering how the woman he loved had betrayed him so completely. I thought about the people of Burkina Faso, waking up to a new reality they hadn't chosen. I thought about the future we had dreamed of building together, now impossible. But I also thought about what Ibrahim had said, "It's not over." And as I stared out the airplane window at the clouds below, I began to formulate a plan of my own. The debriefing in Washington took 3 days. I told them everything they wanted to hear, how successful the operation had been, how completely I had gained Ibrahim's trust, how effectively I had positioned him for removal. I was professional, cooperative, and convincing. I was also lying through my teeth. Because while I was sitting in sterile conference rooms in Langley, recounting my supposed triumph, I was also making plans. I had contacts in the international media, sources in human rights organizations, and most importantly, I had recordings of my conversations with Director Hayes that would prove American involvement in the coup. The ring Ibrahim had given me sat in my jewelry box at home, a constant reminder of what I had lost and what I was fighting for. But it was more than just a piece of jewelry now. It was a symbol of a promise I intended to keep, even if he never knew about it. 3 weeks after my return to Washington, I published my story. Not in a mainstream American publication, but in a European newspaper known for its investigative journalism and its independence from American influence. I told the complete truth about the honey trap operation, about my relationship with Ibrahim, about the CIA's role in his removal from power. The story exploded across international media. African newspapers picked it up immediately, European outlets followed, and even American media were forced to cover it. The photographs of Ibrahim and me together, which I had provided to prove the authenticity of my account, became symbols of American interference in African affairs. Director Hayes called me within hours of the story's publication. "You stupid, naive girl," she said, her voice cold with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've told the truth," I replied calmly. "You've committed treason. You've violated the Official Secrets Act. You've endangered ongoing operations and active personnel. You will spend the rest of your life in prison." "Maybe," I said. "But Ibrahim won't spend the rest of his life in an unmarked grave, and the people of Burkina Faso will know that their leader was removed by foreign powers, not by their own choice." The legal consequences came swiftly. I was arrested, charged with espionage and treason, and held without bail while the government built its case against me. But the international pressure was building too. Human rights organizations were demanding information about Ibrahim's whereabouts and condition. African leaders were calling for his release. European governments were asking uncomfortable questions about American activities in West Africa. The story had taken on a life of its own, bigger than just my betrayal, bigger than just one coup in one small African nation. It had become a symbol of resistance against foreign interference, against the assumption that powerful nations could manipulate smaller ones without consequence. And then, 6 months after his arrest, Ibrahim appeared. Not in public, not officially, but in a video that somehow made its way to international media. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes still held that fire I had fallen in love with. He spoke directly to his people, telling them he was alive, telling them to continue their resistance, telling them that the future they had dreamed of was still possible. He also spoke about me, though he didn't mention me by name. Betrayal can come from those closest to us, he said, but it can also lead to unexpected redemption. Sometimes the very people who hurt us become the instruments of our salvation. I watched that video from my prison cell, tears streaming down my face. He was alive. Somehow, despite everything, despite the power arrayed against him, he was alive and still fighting. My trial became an international spectacle. The prosecution painted me as a traitor who had betrayed her country for personal gain. The defense argued that I was a whistleblower exposing illegal government activities. But the real drama was happening outside the courtroom. Protesters gathered daily outside the federal courthouse, a mix of anti-war activists, African diaspora communities, and ordinary Americans horrified by what their government had done. Signs reading "Free Sarah Mitchell" and "Justice for Ibrahim Traoré" became common sights on the evening news. The international pressure was having an effect too. The African Union had suspended Burkina Faso's membership and was refusing to recognize the military government. Several European nations had imposed sanctions. Most importantly, the story had inspired similar revelations from other intelligence operatives who had been used in comparable operations across Africa. On the day of my sentencing, something extraordinary happened. As the judge was about to deliver his verdict, news broke that Ibrahim Traoré had been released from detention. Not officially, not through negotiations, but through a popular uprising that had finally overwhelmed the military government that had imprisoned him. The judge, clearly rattled by the timing, sentenced me to time served plus 5 years of supervised release. It was a lighter sentence than anyone had expected, clearly influenced by the changing political winds. As I walked out of the courthouse a free woman, I found myself face to face with a crowd of supporters. But standing at the back, almost hidden behind the others, was a figure I recognized immediately. He was older, thinner, wearing simple clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But I would have known Ibrahim Traoré anywhere.
Our eyes met across the crowd.
He didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me in any way that others might notice. But in that brief moment of eye contact, I saw something I had never expected to see again: forgiveness. Later that night, I found a note slipped under my hotel room door. It contained only an address and a time: midnight. I arrived at the address, a small cafe in Arlington, to find Ibrahim sitting alone at a corner table. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time in over a year, he smiled. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "I believe we have much to discuss." We talked until dawn. About betrayal and redemption, about love and duty, about the choices we make and the prices we pay for them. He told me about his months in detention, about the international pressure that had finally secured his release, about his plans to return to Burkina Faso and continue the work he had started. "The question is," he said as the first light of morning began to filter through the cafe windows, "what will you do now?"
"You can't return to your old life. The Chia will never trust you again."
"The journalism world sees you as a spy. You're caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither." I looked at the ring on my finger, the promise ring he had given me in what seemed like another lifetime. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've lost everything. My career, my country, my identity. I don't even know who I am anymore." He reached across the table and took my hand. "You're the woman who chose love over duty.
Vu chose truth over comfort.
Who sacrificed everything for someone she believed in. That's who you are, Sarah. That's who you've always been." 3 months later, I was on a plane to Burkina Faso. Not as a spy, not as a journalist, but as a woman returning to the man she loved and the country she had helped save. The future was uncertain, the challenges immense, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. As the plane descended into Ouagadougou, I pressed my face to the window and saw the red earth of West Africa spread out below me. Somewhere down there was my future, my home, my chance at redemption. And somewhere down there was Ibrahim, waiting for me with patience and forgiveness I had never deserved but had somehow been given anyway. The story could end there, with love conquering all, with redemption triumphant over betrayal. But that wouldn't be the whole truth, and after everything I had been through, the truth was all I had left to offer. The reality was that trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. Ibrahim had forgiven me, but forgiveness and trust are different things. We were building something new together, something that acknowledged our past while reaching toward a different future. It was harder than the fairy tale romance we had shared online, but it was also more real, more honest, more lasting. My secret, the one that had nearly destroyed us both, had become the foundation of something stronger. Not because secrets are good, but because the truth, when finally told, had set us both free. Free to choose each other not out of deception or manipulation, but out of genuine understanding and acceptance. As I stepped off the plane and into the African heat, I felt the weight of that choice, the responsibility of that freedom. I was no longer the woman who had arrived here 2 years ago, full of lies and hidden agendas. I was Sarah Mitchell, former CIA operative, former journalist, current lover of Ibrahim Traoré and future citizen of Burkina Faso. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to build together. And this time, we would build it on truth.